Imagine being a Bayonetta fan a decade ago. After 3 years of radio silence, your first word of a sequel is her stomping into a Wii U exclusive teaser. It's very little to go on, but I'm sure everyone was at least happy that Nintendo's deep coffers willed it into existence. Then your first real look came at E3 2013 with a sultry crotch shot. Platinum knows Bayonetta's swagger sells. Compare this to Kratos' reveal at E3 2016. After 6 minutes of build-up, Kratos steps out of the shadows and towers like a badass. Now these two incredibly different personalities are getting new releases within 2 weeks of one another.
Are we heading to Thimbleventer on a shopping trip for Mummy, little one?
While Bayonetta's sequel may not have rocked Charon's canoe as hard as Dad of War, it does make a significant change to the formula that we need to discuss. Bayonetta 2 is dramatically easier than its predecessor. There are a wide range of causes, for better or worse. Sudden quick times are eliminated, specifically the ones that cause instant death. Witch time is heavily emphasized and now always obtainable in battle. Items can be used without penalty to score, meaning temporary damage nullification, damage boost, and healing are all freely available at any time. Combo score is now based on damage output, not combo variety, drying up the pool of worthwhile combos. Muspelheims, the challenges that award bonus health and magic, are dumbed down dramatically, resulting in greater resources. Magic is used for umbering climaxes, which offer immense stagger and massive damage. Not a single one of these changes favor difficulty, and while digging deeply into these changes and their merit is beyond the scope of today's video, it's important context for today's bosses. I did at least play on the third climax difficulty, the hard equivalent, to give Bayonetta 2's bosses a better chance to shine. Without further ado, let's put the spotlight on them from worst to best. Number 11, Valor. We round out the bottom with a set of bosses I'm dubbing the Terrible Trio. They all share key design issues, in spite of minor differences that give individual fights a slight edge. Starting with Valor, where did this even come from? Usually there's some sort of build-up, but nope. This guy jump scares you with no fanfare, setting your expectations appropriately to whelmed for what's to come. As a spectacle, Valor is wonderful. Fighting a Beyblade Knight skybound, then falling into the sea depths for a subaquatic showdown is stunning. Yet he falls in line with Sapientia's whirlpool of mechanical mediocrity from Bayonetta. Prioritizing how cool the battle looks makes mechanics and combat expression take a back seat. The only expectation of you is to dodge bland attacks for witch time, do a short combo, rinse and repeat. This is made all the more tedious by Valor's tendency to outrange the player, making half the battle a Devil May Cry 2 shooting gallery. His sword slashes and topspin dives are well telegraphed, which is good, but without greater variety to keep the player guessing, Valor's offense quickly becomes one-dimensional. Even underwater with new animations, the dodge timing isn't altered enough to prevent autopilot. Finally, while the idea of Bayonetta taking flight is awesome, it's used to lazy effect. Her flight is only used as a band-aid to allow her to rubber band toward bosses in a 3D space without meaningful expression in handling this new movement style. It's like all the ham-fisted genre shifts in Bayonetta 1. Half-baked and disappointing diversions, a description that suits our first of the Terrible Trio perfectly. Number 10, Insidious. A word defined as proceeding in a gradual and subtle way, but with harmful effects, is an apt description for this trio's brain drain. Of them, Insidious offers the greatest opportunity for Bayonetta's standard combat to shine, and yet it has so many odd tells it's hard to grasp when you can safely attack. The laser raves are challenging to read the speed of with their odd angles. The tentacles turn red, but have deceptive delays to throw you off. The animation of the eye slamming shut baits you into dodging earlier than you should. And while I think the tells aren't the easiest to gauge, it's the evasive timing that's the real issue. Even once I understood what attack was coming, dodge windows seem abnormally tight here. It made it difficult to get any rhythm going, the joyous bread and butter of Bayonetta's combat. Now, I'll admit this does leave greater room for personal improvement, which I do celebrate. But when deceptive animations are the primary culprit, it feels cheap when you fail rather than a digestible path to success. This fight also suffers from the same mediocre swimming and flying movement as Valor, but I'll give it credit for being able to use Snake Within to reposition for more deliberate control. It's most prevalent during the phase transitions, which are sadly the most dull portions of the battle. You're pushed away only to face a missile barrage that is laughably easy to evade. It makes this whole section feel like pointless filler. Worst of all, this battle takes place immediately after Valor's chapter, giving no reprieve between Bayonetta 2's worst bosses. I give it credit for more agency and movement and better combat pacing outside of the transitions in Valor, but it's not enough to rise out of Bayonetta 2's basement of quality. Number 9, Glamor. Our finalist of the terrible trio, Glamor separates himself in small ways from his peers. First, there's actually build up to the battle. Glamor has presence throughout the first 2 levels, even in a brief fight similar to Fortitudo's arc in Bayonetta. Second, there's much greater variety in what you do in the battle. And third, the spectacle is the star of these shows, and it's by far the best here on the outside of the whirlpool, careening inside its depths, then shooting out into a gorgeous battle amongst the golden clouds. Of course, it's not all sunshine and roses. That spectacle comes at the cost of painfully dull gameplay throughout. Starting outside the whirlwind, you're tasked with dodging debris, the serpent's tail, and not much else. Every half minute, you'll get a chomp from the serpent, your sole opportunity for witch time and damage. Soul segment feels more like a universal ride than a boss battle, which doesn't improve much in the second phase. Here you get slightly more opportunities to attack, but the trade-off is harshly obscured vision through the torrential downpour. That's the added difficulty here. Faster reactions are necessary because it's harder to see. Otherwise, it's the same deal. Dodge debris until you get a chomp to counter on. The final phase is a lot better, but it's plagued by the same problems we've seen thus far. Underwhelming attack variety and mediocre thought behind player movement. Watching Bayonetta zoom back and forth looks so unnatural, and it doesn't feel any better under your control. I found it better to spam attacks to close the gap since they have an absurd magnetic pull towards your target. This section outstays its welcome, requiring you to defeat 2 other serpents that don't count toward the boss health bar, but they are at least a bit more compelling in their dodge and attack rhythm. The final showdown is similar, with single swipes, enraged quadruple slashes, and ice shard shots. The variety isn't great, but the pacing here is by far the best of the bottom 3, especially considering this is Chapter 3. It's easier to excuse basic mechanics early when players are still adjusting. Even so, everything wrong about this trio lands it handily in an almost interchangeable bottom 3. Number 8, Glamor. It may seem inconsistent with all my complaints to this point to single out Glamor above the bottom rabble. Glamor suffers from all the same issues, yet I'm less bothered by them for one reason. When the new big boss formula was a fresh one-off, it was a lot more easy to overlook its flaws. Is Glamor perfect? Absolutely not. Like Valor, its swipes, chomps, and fireballs are telegraphed from a mile away. You'll spend most of your time mindlessly hacking away. Like Insidious, it has a horribly telegraphed and hard to read hit when it scales the building, bumping into you. Like, what? How is that even an attack? They're either too easily telegraphed or they're obscured like that. And like Glamor, it's extremely simple. Yet, that works with this as the prologue. Unlike Glamor, the fight doesn't outstay its welcome, with pitch-perfect pacing to capitalize on the incredible opening stage. This is especially thanks to no unnecessary downtime like Insidious's missiles. And compared to Valor's womp womp entrance, Glamor introduces a devious plot point of Bayonetta's summons turning against her, and is the catalyst of Bayonetta's journey to Inferno to save Jean, and holds weight if you've grown familiar with your demon buddy in the first game. So in spite of all its flaws, Glamor was a great way to cap off an adrenaline-fueled opener that set us on the path to the depths of hell, both in the story and our preceding bosses that copied its format to lackluster effect. With the majority of the game's bodacious behemoths quarantined below, it's worth an honorable shout out to the OG Colossal crew. Fortitudo, Temperantia, Justitia, and Sapientia all visit us briefly. Fortitudo with his signature stomps, chomps, fireballs, and eruptions. It's pitch-perfect fan service fighting alongside your past self as an ally. Sapientia makes an appearance on foot, but she gets a fight in a mecha, zooming around the screen as he does the same, which is awesome. He was way more aggressive than his waterbound counterpart, which made for quite the clash. Justitia dies really fast. Basic tentacle smacks and face tube bashes. Yup. Temperantia punches and shoots. Punches are good for witch time beatdowns, and shooting weirdly has him fire far enough behind you that you can just get up in his face and smack freely the whole time. Odd, but a decent throwback. I was at least happy to see them all, each boss kept to a brief cameo without treading to an overdone rehash. Number 7, Prophet. Prophet is disappointing less for what he is, rather for what he is not. Breaking into the humanoid fights that Bayonetta excels at, Prophet is far too basic compared to what's to come. That and, once again, we're relying too heavily on flying for my taste, especially with how much he likes to put space between you. His attacks are standard stuff, with dodge frames feeling overly forgiving. Spam it, get witch time, then combo. His fist claps and debris tosses aren't varied enough to catch you slipping, and he allows for you to wail on him far too long without countering. I believe the idea is him being a shade of the big bad, that he's toying with you. There are ways to convey this through animations, him parrying you, voiceovers with sass, but instead he's a punching bag until you win, then you lose in the cutscene that follows. It reminds me a lot of my complaints of Dragon Ball Z Kakarot a few years ago. Kick Frieza's ass in battle, then get devastated in a cutscene. It's incongruent with the threat they're meant to pose, leaving a distaste in my mouth. As for the combat offering, it's far too plain to break above the average. Number 6, Loptr. Now that's more like it. Featured later in the game, Loptr is the Prophet, but better. He uses similar clapping melee beats, but they're far more varied and therefore threatening. Staying at range is hardly safe, as he has a wide variety of magic that does tons of damage and is really tricky to dodge. It's a nice gambit of picking your poison. He isn't as complex as the bosses to come, but it's a nice blueprint of the direction we're starting to move in. While I do appreciate the narrative build-up spoken through the boss design of Aesir's 3 iterations in the Prophet, Loptr, and the final battle to come, it'd be nice if they didn't take up a quarter of the boss roster, leaving space for greater battle variety. Nonetheless, I still enjoyed this amplified take on the Prophet's design. Number 5, Aesir. As promised, we arrive at Aesir, this game's big bad with 2 battles of build-up. It's hard not to notice it, with the first phase being a hybrid of both the previous battles. It's a nice homage and introduction, considering how bonkers it gets after. Aesir may have retaken the eyes, but I'm sure they cut a scene where he snorted a dozen lines, because hot damn, this guy is cracked. The difference in pace is ridiculous. I could hardly tell you what's going on here. I guess that gives room for the fight to grow with your skill, but geez! At least you have Baldur helping you out. Speaking of, stolen elements from his OG fight make an appearance, with grandiose attacks delivered through cutscenes and finished with quick-time mashing. What he lacks is the charisma Baldur had, making them feel hollow in comparison. Aesir is more of a generic, overpowered god-villain archetype ripped out of a mediocre anime. Not compelling in the slightest, but at least the rest of the cast are stars. I'm beating a dead horse here too, but the flight really doesn't add much to the fight. Similarly, the final flight toward Jean's summon that copies Jubileus' demise is equally devoid of creativity. I guess they learned that adding a bunch of planets was confusing, so instead it's a barren skyline with minor wind to push you off course. Not too exciting, and it lasts a weirdly long time. I do enjoy the weakened phase right beforehand though. Fun to kick his fallen from grace booty, or hell, let Baldur do it for you. For as flawed as many aspects of Aesir are, it's easier for the humanoid bouts to let Bayonetta's combat shine than the big spectacle battles. They're the best playground to test your ability to maintain combos, vary your offense, add insect-like parries, dodge offsets, and more to blast your score to pure platinum status. It just so happens there are bosses to come that do it a lot better than this farce of a deity. Number 4, Golem. One of Bayonetta's most interesting enemies reappears with a boss credit this time around. With your fight taking place across 2 chapters with 3 total parts, it gets a lot of time to show off its many forms, even if the middle battle is a brain-dead panther rush up a staircase while it throws a tantrum with 0 actual combat. Easiest pure platinum of my life. I'll take that ego boost, thank you very much. I needed it, because of any boss thus far, I got brutalized by Golem. With so many different combat styles showcased in such a short time, the moment I got a handle on one of his transformations, I was moving to the next curveball and striking out. The hideous blue chrome and glowing orange color scheme burnt my eyes, making it harder to read tells, as did the camera, which has a tendency to push parts of bigger models off screen when you're fighting up close. A trade-off compared to the first Bayonetta is that the entire body takes damage rather than just the core. Perhaps this was a compromise for his speed and damage output. Initially, he just spins around firing off lasers, then he becomes a swordman slashing away at your HP. Well, mine anyway, since I found his blade far more hard to follow than Valor's. In the final battle, he shows off the bird and the beast. Mobility is a big factor here, as is increasingly varied move pools that I never got a handle on in this first attempt. Notice that I say mobility is a big factor here, where you don't have the ability to fly, so your ability to close the gap actually matters. It makes things a little more difficult, especially since he mixes in the original transformations as well. I've complained a lot about variety, so credit where credit is due. Golem has it in droves. It shows just how creative they can get with bigger models, even if their size does add unfortunate limitations with the camera. All in all, we're rocketing to much greater heights of quality. Number 3, Alraune. Quality that is spearheaded brilliantly here. She takes the best of humanoid and beast and executes them to a high level that only the absolute best of Bayonetta 2 can contend with. Having fought a lot of large demon mini-bosses to this point, it was nice to see one pared down to your size and highlight how incredible Bayonetta's witch time-fueled tit-for-tat combat can be. She uses a host of heavy melee combos with reasonable speed, yet varies their timing to keep you engaged. If you fall for these tricks, she does substantial damage. Her ranged attacks are limited, though she'll toss out 2 flower minions that leave sticky goo to trap you in. Taking them out only takes a few hits, but they serve their role well to divert your attention. The second phase is equally great, feeling similar to fighting when a golem forms. It features all the moves you'd expect, but I found them difficult to dodge for the wrong reasons. Like I mentioned with Golem, you often get pushed against the boss with half their body leaving the screen. Not only that, being squished against their body, as you should be to attack, makes it harder to catch the tells you can see. Like her first phase, getting hit does hefty damage, making these mistakes add up quickly. Even if the camera is a bit jank, I see the potential to learn and master this fight, one that is elevated even further by the story stakes for saving Jean. While not perfect, Alraune has a well-paced, moderate difficulty humanoid phase, and a beast phase that showcases the best Bayonetta 2 can offer in the category, in spite of its limitations. Number 2, Masked Lumen. Like Aesir, this mysterious sage is on speed. Your first battle is only in Chapter 4. Nothing is in the same galaxy as Masked Lumen's combat prowess to this point. His versatile bag of tricks is full of so much variety, it was taxing to learn on the fly. I went based off pure reaction and flubbed quite hard. I would akin it more to panic spam than graceful combos and evasion. Still, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Set piece wise, it's phenomenal. And backed by competent mechanics as well? Take that, terrible trio! 40 and Temper's first appearance are as a backdrop to your battle, summoned by your masked adversary to swoop in for occasional AoE attacks. These are often telegraphed by a Lumen glowing, which you can knock him out of with quick reaction to save yourself and score some free damage. I will note that the environment and effects are busy, obscuring some of Lumen's quick tells, but I'll allow it with how amazing it feels. He employs a mixture of ranged and melee attacks, with quick movement backing it all to keep you on your toes. As for defense, he dodges and counters a lot. This is a fight that punishes carelessness to the highest degree. It's overwhelming, yet feels more controlled than Aesir's frenetic spam. I felt more confident in my ability to learn and respond to Lumen with rematches under my belt, a hallmark of good design and rewarding replayability. You get 2 other opportunities to face him, one in Insidious's insides, which is quite a tongue twister and as gross as you'd imagine. It's mostly the same clown fiesta of panic offense and defense that becomes more controlled with experience. His only significant addition is an attack that freezes you in place, with a quick time stick to waggle free. His final fight with the Baldur reveal is equally great with much greater design variation. It also has a cheeky Star Wars reference that highlights the best of the game's dialogue.
Your impudence will cost you your life, witch!
So you're saying diplomacy has failed, then?
His combos here are slower with delayed delivery, making them trickier to dodge in general, but even more so if you react based on previous encounters. The dash is still fast and rough to avoid. The sword coming out of the ground is super delayed. I don't think I successfully dodged it once. He also had a spooky feather attack from range, but I only saw it one time. I really love seeing the interactions between Bayonetta and Baldur once he's revealed, especially his sacrifice in the end.
Just one time. Call me Daddy.
Holy shit! I was expecting the typical cliche line for him to say father, dad, pops maybe, anything but call me daddy. I get the Cereza has called Rosa mummy this whole time, and maybe it's a cultural thing, but the timing was so good it just had to have been delivered comedically. God, I love this game's dialogue. As much as I adore Baldur's battle, any of the singular bouts would be worthy of top 3 billing, but as a whole, they make up arguably the game's best boss, probably for most of you, but I have an unconventional choice that made me call him daddy 100 times over. And the number 1 best boss in Bayonetta 2, Rodin. If you thought round 1 was tough, you really aren't ready for the second. If I were making a modern list of my top 10 hardest boss battles of all time, this would be on it, no question. Rodin packs a wallop, enough to kill Bayonetta or Jean in 6 to 7 hits, or Rosa in 2 to 3, leaving a razor-thin margin for mistakes. In the battle, you're by far the most likely to be making them. He doesn't just hit hard, he hits fast. I often throw around words in these rankings like lightning quick or blazing speed. This time, I mean it. From the animation start to their hitbox, on average, Rodin's attacks have 15 to 20 startup frames. Running at 60 frames per second, that means you have on average a quarter to a third of a second to react. For comparison, let's use two other notoriously difficult bosses. Malenia from Elden Ring's Sinister Waterfall Dance is a perfect choice. It has 128 startup frames, then 40 frames between each of the subsequent flurries. But D-Mod, that game is meant to be played at a slower pace. True, but I think many of you will agree, Waterfall's follow-ups in particular are too fast for their closing speed and damage, and yet they are twice as slow as Rodin. If that won't suffice, take Devil May Cry 5's Virgil. Using the series that inspired Bayonetta, Virgil on Dante Must Die has 40 to 60 startup frames on most attacks. He uses teleportation and long windups with fast delivery to make it tricky, but it still allows 2 to 3 times what Rodin does for you to prepare yourself. So we established brutal damage and speed on par with fighting game attacks. Now consider his unparalleled range. Rodin doesn't do ranged attacks. Oh, what a boon, you might think. Wrong. Wicked weaves from any angle, any range, and he can close the gap in less than half a second with a clothesline or stomp. You are never safe. Your only possible moment of reprieve is through Witch Time, making learning how to read his tells in the blink of an eye and react a must. Then do it a couple dozen more times in a single run and you'll be getting somewhere. Even if you do get Witch Time, that doesn't mean you're actually safe either. You're never safe. If he's still mid-combo, you better be ready to dodge again. Screw your turn, I'm Rodin. Then he pulls his Devil Trigger for phase 2, where he gains power armor through most of your attacks, making offensive windows during Witch Time even smaller. He's great at lulling you into a rhythm of multiple Witch Times in a row, feeling like you finally nailed down a pattern, then throwing a faster or slower attack into the mix and shaving off boatloads of health. Or maybe he'll just grab you. Same as the first fight. If he grabbed you, he smokes you down to 1 HP. Except here the windup is faster, the tell is more subtle, his pursuit is so aggressive you have to dodge it, and sometimes he'll do a faster version up close that is even more difficult to counter. With all of these advantages, you could say Rodin is cheap, and I'd agree. But I'm also a masochist and I get sick pleasure out of overcoming these sort of brutal bosses. I never had to dig deeper into my bag of tricks or improve my combat skills even close to what I had to do to beat Rodin after 2 hours of agonizing defeat. I tested several different weapons and accessories to find the best combinations, even swapping characters entirely to Rosa for her triple damage output, with the caveat that she takes triple damage. Knowing that Rodin could end a good run in 1 to 2 mistakes was terrifying. It pushed me to learn better combos, start adding in gunplay to the end of each input, and learn his moveset like I was studying for a college midterm. With his overkill design, it's hard for me to say he's gonna be most people's choice for the best boss in Bayonetta 2, and if you feel he isn't, that he's unfair, frustrating, a chore, Kamiya laughing in the face of the player. I completely understand. But even if Rodin dashed my dreams of victory with one-liners for hours, once I finally did claim victory, the boss euphoria was unreal. That, and the training to reach it that pushed my skill to new heights, makes Rodin my runaway choice for the #1 spot. But of course, that's just my opinion. What did you think of Bayonetta 2's bosses? Let us know in the comments below. Next time, we'll be finishing out the trilogy with a look at Bayonetta 3. It's been a blast and I'm sad to see it end, but I'm grateful I get to share it all with you.